Today we're taking a look at the brand new Native Instruments Massive X. This is a highly anticipated instrument which is now ready for release. This is a very early version of the instrument. In fact, as you can see up here, this is actually a beta version. When sophisticated software like this is in its early days, it tends to go through quite a lot of versions. So it's possible, depending when you're watching this video, that the instrument might look slightly different. For instance, I believe that some specific parameter values are going to be being added soon and so on. But whenever you're watching this, you should find that the bulk of the features and the layout of the instrument is the same. So what we're going to do in this video is to just introduce the various different modules, talk about the signal flow and also some of the new features. And what we'll do in a later video is have a look at some specific modules in a little bit more depth. Let's start by looking at the oscillators. We have two primary oscillators which are identical. We can see they're numbered 1 and 2, and we have two identical sets of controls. At the moment you can see in oscillator 1 I have a wavetable loaded which is sine, tri, saw, square. So if I wanted to just morph through that wavetable, I could adjust that value here, or actually you can see that there's also a red number 1 which tells you that one of the 16 macros has already been pre-assigned in this preset, so I could make that adjustment here as well. The wavetables themselves are accessible by clicking on this underlined menu here, and this is a feature throughout the instrument. Wherever you see bold text with underlining, that tells you that there's a menu there. So to have a look at the available wavetables, we can click here and we can see a lot of folders containing quite a large amount of wavetables, many more than in the original Massive. Speaking of which, if we look at the remastered folder here, we can find a few kind of old favorites which have been remastered and incorporated into this instrument, but we'll just stick with what we have loaded here for the time being. So as well as the wavetables, we have various different ways in which the wavetable can be read out. So we have various different modes which are accessible here, and depending on which of these we choose, we can affect the sound in really quite significant ways. We also have, in addition to the various different modes, several sub-modes which will be unique to each mode, and they appear here. So you can see in this particular option standard, we can play forwards, backwards, we can invert the polarity, we can adjust intensity and so on. So that gives us a lot of sound design options here. Underneath the primary oscillators, you can see we have two mod oscillators. These are used for phase modulation, and you can see that each of these has a few basic modulating shapes and also options for controlling the frequency in various different ways, as does the primary oscillator up here. Each oscillator also contains its own filter, but depending on which mode we select, we'll find that these controls can change into something different. So again, we'll just go back to standard for now. These will be covered in more depth in a later video. Moving on now to the noise oscillators, we can see that we have two of these and they're identical, and we have our output level here, and start with white noise, but there's all kinds of various options available here, and these can be used as layers in sounds for sound design, or they could also be used as modulators. So all kinds of really interesting textural sounds, some which might be familiar to Massive users of the original instrument, but all kinds of brand new things here that we wouldn't have experienced before. So a lot of very interesting possibilities there. We come now to the insert effects, and we have three of these here, A, B and C. At the moment you can see they're all off, but if we were to click on any of the menus, then we bring up the various different options, and there's all kinds of distortions here, frequency shifters and so on. For instance, we could load up a bit crusher, or we could try a frequency shifter. And at the moment these are all wired in series, but as we'll see, the routing of these can be changed in all kinds of different ways. We do actually have some supplementary oscillators available, so I could potentially select the OSC option from each of these, and we can see now that we have just basic analog wave shapes, but these again can be used in the very flexible routing of the instrument, as we'll see later on. Moving on now to look at the send effects on the right hand side of the instrument, we have 3, X, Y and Z. These are all the same in that they have the same options available from the drop down menu, and what we have are stereo effects such as dimension expanders, stereo expanders, we have finishing effects such as EQ, we have a distortion effect, this nonlinear lab which is a kind of amp simulator, mod delays, reverbs and so on. So quite a lot of options here, and what we'll also find is if we select any of these, that again there will be different modes available in most of them, and these can be configured in series or in parallel, so there's quite a lot that we can do at the output stage at the end of the signal path there. We can actually look at this routing now because it appears on what's called the mod bar in the middle of the instrument here. So if I just click on this routing tab, then this is where we can see how all the various different modules have been connected together. This is a default setting. We can see here the 2 oscillators. These at the moment are fed into A. A is the first of our insert effects. We can see that that is before the filter. Asimov here is F, and then that goes into B, and it goes into C, which is the second of the insert effects. And one thing that we haven't talked too much about yet are the phase modulators. We mentioned them briefly in the oscillator here, but you can see how they're configurable at various points in the signal path. We also have feedback modules here. In this case, we can just see that we've created a feedback loop around the filter. So all these are completely interchangeable and flexible. Over on the right hand side here, this is our send effects, X, Y and Z, and as you can see at the moment these are wired in series, but this can be changed in various different ways here. So if we were to load a preset such as Massive X blank, then we would see that in this case we have no sound from the instrument at all, and so what we'll need to do is start patching like this, for instance. So now we have just one oscillator which is wired directly to the amp, but obviously what we would probably end up doing is taking insert effects and taking our filters, and once we'd loaded in our various options, then we'd be able to start building our patch. But maybe for the time being, just while we're getting used to the instrument, we'll stick with the initialized Massive X, which as you can see has that configuration there. So moving on to start talking about the modulators and bypassing this voicing tab here, because this has all kinds of options which we don't really have time to discuss in this video, we can see that we've got a lot of modulation sources here. We've got performers, envelopes, LFOs and trackers, and what I can do is if I want to assign any of these, if I click on the crosshairs, then you can see that inside the instrument all of the available mod destinations become visible. So what I could do is just select one of those here and then click to drag, or I could assign an LFO and I could double click to just assign the LFO to the whole range and so on. So these are again a step up from what we might be used to in the original Massive. The performer's been expanded so that we can customize this in various different ways using all kinds of drawable shapes. So this is something a little bit more like automation in a DAW now, and really this presents a lot of really interesting options, because if we just zoom in here, then we can select areas and we can scale those in various different ways to speed up, slow down, speed up and then slow down, and vice versa. So all kinds of interesting stuff. The envelopes here, we can see that we've got a few different types which can be interchanged, and these again offer quite a lot of options for the various different stages. LFOs, we've got a couple of different options. We've got the switcher LFO with a whole variety of different shapes. Again, those shapes could be modulated by an envelope, for instance. And we also have a random LFO here, which is great for introducing just a little bit of unpredictability into the instrument. And we also have something new here called trackers. And the idea with trackers is that we take incoming MIDI data and then we could use this to control wavetables, effect levels, filter cutoffs, the timbre of a sound and so on. So each of these modulators really deserve a video in their own right. We're just going to leave this brief overview here, but hopefully that's enough to break the instrument down into its various different sections and help you to map out the signal flow and see the available options.